You are listening to the teaching ministry of the Westgate Church of Christ. You can find us on the web at westgatecfc.net. Our morning worship service begins at 10 a.m. each Sunday. Thanks for visiting with us, and God bless.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. I say everybody. We got a lot of folks out today for various reasons, folks on vacation and other such things, but it's good to see those of you who are here today, and I'm encouraged to be here and encouraged to have you be a part of what we're doing here at Westgate. We started last Sunday a series called Mountaintop, where we're looking at Jesus' words from the mountain. We're looking at his Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, from Matthew chapters 5 through 7, and also from Luke chapter 6. And last week we started by looking at the concept of the kingdom, and how the kingdom of God doesn't fit our worldly way of looking at things. We look at things from one perspective in our world. We look at things from a secular perspective or a popular perspective. But the kingdom of God as Jesus presented it, shows us what life is really all about. And that is life in God's kingdom, understanding his principles of power and strength and forgiveness and love, and how God fills us when we're empty, and how God makes us strong when we're weak. And this week, our sermon title, and I'm sure most of you, when you saw that, you finished up the phrase. You saw that sermon title, "If It Ain't Broke," and then immediately after that, you said in your mind, "Don't fix it," right? If it ain't broke, what does that mean? If you hear somebody say, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," it's one of those things that you have to kind of think about for a second. It means don't meddle around with something that's working. Okay, if something's working and something's going well, then don't fool with it. Just leave it alone, right? You know, somebody wants to start tinkering with something or messing with something that's working just fine. Well, just leave it alone if it's working well. Now, you got to be honest. If it's not working well, if it is broken, well, fix it. Yeah, thank you, brother. I love Bob. Don't y'all love Bob? Bob, I love Bob. Last Sunday, my dad was here, and he said, "Son, I've got this shirt I want to wear." It's just this T-shirt he had. He said, "I got this shirt I want to wear to church Sunday. You think that? It's kind of fit in with that?" I said, "Dad, let me tell you about Bob Romine." And he was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, that's one thing I love about this church. You can wear a three-piece suit, or you can wear your T-shirt and shorts, and we love you, okay? Because we're not about the outward appearance, and so that's good. So, but if it's broken, it's in need of fixing. And you know, when we think about our relationships in this world today, relationships we have with our children, parents and children, husbands, wives, employers, employees, friends, family members, a lot of times relationships get messed up. They get broken. And Jesus says, you know, we talk a lot about how Jesus came into this world to repair the relationship between God and man. But he also came to repair the relationships between man and man. In fact, that's why it's so important over in 1st, 2nd, and really 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the whole idea of how can you love God if you don't love each other? And so it's important that relationships be mended. That's a kingdom idea, a kingdom concept. So for the past 2 Saturdays, Julianne and I and Wilson, Kirk's been out of town with his grandparents, but Julianne and I and Wilson, past 2 Saturdays we've spent at the ballpark. Now, I played Little League baseball when I was a kid. The boys have been playing Little League baseball for about 3 years now, I guess. But I saw something yesterday I'd never seen before. Let me tell you something. It was hot yesterday. And I know I've been down here, I know it gets hot. I know it gets real hot. I know it can get up 105, 110 degrees down here. It was 91 degrees yesterday, and it was hot. Humidity, I think, topped out at 50% at one point. It was hot. It was brutal. But the weather wasn't the only thing that was hot yesterday. And those of you parents who go to those little league games, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it got plumb nasty. There was one point where, there was umpire. Umpires were making. I mean, this was for coach pitch. I'm not even talking about the big kids. Coach picks. These kids are barely, know their ABs well. They're probably a little better than that. But coach pitch ball, and these parents are getting worked up about these umpires and the calls they're making. And there was one guy sitting there. You'd have thought he was talking to a New York Yankees game umpire, professional baseball or something. The things that were coming out of this man's mouth, and saying it with a Yankee accent at the same time, which made it even worse. And it got bad, and then the people in the stands, and they was talking to just saying bad things, and coaches started coming, don't you talk about my kid, another coach come. Finally, one coach has some sense to come out and go, parents, shut up! Our kids are watching this. I mean, there was one guy, he said, if this fence wasn't between us, it'd be on right now. And he said, well, we can move the fence. It was bad. It was bad. Anger. Unrestrained, unchecked, unrational, irrational. Anger has a way of tearing us apart if we're not careful. As a teenager, my brother one time, anger ends up making things get broken, doesn't it? I remember my brother storming out of the house one time. He was so mad, he slammed the storm door, broke the glass. Got mad at me one time, stabbed me in the head with a screwdriver. He was 5, I was 15. We were wrestling in the living room floor. Just happened to be a screwdriver laying there. He picked it up. Right between the eyes. One time, Julianne and I got in an argument. I got so mad. We were in the kitchen. I had this cutting board in my hand. She'll never forget this. I was mad. I don't remember what it was about. See, probably wasn't about anything important. I slammed that thing, my favorite cutting. I do all our cooking, most of our cooking. I slammed that thing in the floor, broke it all to pieces. Messed up my good cutting board. It's her fault, too. Somebody throws a punch and a nose gets broken. One nation lashes out at another and a treaty gets broken. Let anger get a hold of you when disciplining your children, and trust gets broken. Use angry words and a heart gets broken. Church unity gets broken. Relationships get broken. And in his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addresses the problem from a kingdom perspective. And he tells us how to deal with anger. Now, up to this point in Matthew, Jesus, he's announcing the kingdom of God, that God's kingdom is here on earth. He says that, God loves you despite your imperfections. He says those that follow him will be distinctive like salt and light. He goes on to talk about, in fact, in Matthew 5:20, Jesus says that our righteousness needs to surpass that of those who look perfect on the outside. In other words, the Pharisees, because God's not satisfied with outward appearance. God's looking for the heart. He wants the heart to be changed, and he's going to illustrate this in several ways in this passage. And I think it's safe to say, if you look at our passage here, Matthew 5, starting in verse 21, right in there, and you look at what Jesus begins to say about anger and all of that, if you were to ask the average American, are you a good person? Generally speaking, do you have a good heart? You know what most people would say? Well, I'm not perfect or anything. I make mistakes from time to time, but, I've never killed anybody or anything, but, I'm a pretty good fellow. As if murder, that's the line, I do a lot of things, but I ain't ever killed anybody. As if, killing someone, you're bad. You killed somebody. Before that, you're fine. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to get at. I'm basically a good person because I haven't killed anybody. And Jesus says, well, no, don't be so quick. You see, he doesn't assume that everything that his audience has heard is in the Bible. In fact, a lot of things that his audience had heard, well, a lot of those things were not in the Bible. A lot of those things were oral tradition issues, things that other people had said and that had begun to be applied. Scripture was being applied. He says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, don't murder. That's in the Old Testament, right? Commandment number 6 of the 10 Commandments. Don't kill people. Don't murder. But then he goes on. The oral tradition part says, and anyone who murders will be subject to the judgment or to judgment. So if you murder, you're subject to judgment. You'll be brought before the local courts. And so this crowd that Jesus is speaking to, they would have been familiar with both the commandment and with the oral tradition part that had been handed down. They understood that don't murder. And Jesus goes on to say, he says, but I tell you, he said, you've heard it said, don't kill, and if you kill, you'll be subject to judgment. He says, but I tell you that anyone who's angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. I want to give you 2 points and we'll close. First, Jesus talks to us about the attitude that breaks relationships. If we're going to fix that which is broken, we need to understand how it got broke in the first place, right? So we're going to talk about the attitude, and then we're going to talk about some actions that need to take place after understanding the attitude. First of all, now this attitude is in verses 21 and 22. Jesus is saying, look, let's talk about attitude for a minute. Let's talk about the heart. We've been talking about the heart. We're going to talk about the heart a little bit more. I want to show you how things can go from bad to worse if you're not careful. Anger goes through some stages. So, first of all, anyone who's angry with his brother is subject to judgment. In other words, that person is subject to the same consequence as murder. You mean if I'm angry with somebody, I'm subject to judgment? Well, but yeah. Why? Because killing, some of you in law enforcement know this better than, and in the legal profession know this better than I do. Killing doesn't start with a knife pulled or a shot fired, does it? Killing starts in the heart. Now, I think we need some clarification. Anger in its simplest form, all of us get angry. The Bible tells us, when you get angry, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Don't sin in your anger. We all get angry. It's part of a natural reaction that happens in us in certain situations. It alerts us to an obstruction of our will. It raises alarm. It raises resistance even before we have time to think about it. And I don't think all anger is bad. Jesus got angry. Jesus got angry at the Pharisees for their attitudes. Jesus got angry in the temple when he overturned the tables of the money changers. Jesus got angry. The Bible talks about the wrath of God. The problem is, we usually get angry about the wrong things and it turns into something evil really fast. We want to hurt somebody. Jesus says unchecked anger can take you down a very scary road in a very short amount of time. Probably the most famous criminal lawyer of his generation, Clarence Darrow, once said, everyone is a potential murderer. I have not killed anyone, but I frequently get satisfaction out of obituary notices. Jesus says anger can be as serious as murder in the heart if left unchecked, and if it's not checked, if it's not calmed, it can go to the next stage. Verse 22, Jesus says, again, anyone who says to his brother, Racha, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Now, I know some of you are sitting there going, well, I can mark that one off my list, because I have never said Racha with the, not just Raka, but Racha. I've never said that to my brother. So I'm okay, right? Well, I bet you have. Because racha literally means worthless, useless, empty head. Ever seen anything closely related to that to someone? Some language experts think that the word may have originated from the sound a person makes in clearing the throat in preparation to spit. Shall I give you a demonstration? No. Got close enough with that sound, right? You know that sound. Somebody's getting ready to spit. We called it harking when I was a kid. It just sounds awful. You hear somebody doing it, it's just like, oh. You do it, it's okay, but somebody else does it. Jesus says this is a greater evil than just anger. In anger, we want to hurt somebody. With racha, we take it to the next level. We hold that person in contempt. We cease to care about them. It meant to cast somebody aside, to spit on them, to say, you're worthless. Have you ever been there? I have. Sorry to say. Been so mad at somebody you couldn't care less if they fell off the face of the earth. Jesus said people that express this contempt are guilty enough to be judged by the Sanhedrin. That was the highest court in the land. That was the highest court in the Jewish religion. It was like the Supreme Court. I mean, we're talking serious business here. But then the third stage, if it keeps going, the third stage is malice. It goes from just anger to contempt to malice. He says, but any one of you who says, you fool, or in the King James, thou fool, will be in danger of hell fire. Now that's a pretty serious statement. We're okay up to that point with anybody who's angry with his brother subject to judgment. And anybody who says racha subject to the Sanhedrin. But we all, everybody in here, I know at least folks my age and older, we grew up being told, you better not ever call nobody a fool, because you go to hell for that. Now, you call them just about anything else, but you better not call them a fool. I remember one time saying, and we were at home, and I don't know, me and my sister were arguing about something, and either I said or she said, and I can't remember now who it was, one of us said, fool, like that. And the other one, I think it was me. I said it because she went, ooh, you going to hell? You know, don't call anybody a fool. Now, if I had known what Jesus meant by fool, I probably wouldn't have said some of the other stuff that I said about people either. You see, what Jesus meant by the word fool, it's the Greek word is where we get our word moron from. But it goes even beyond our definition of moron. I mean, we say that sometimes about people, right? You know, little brothers playing with each other. You moron. This word goes even beyond that. Fool carries with it the idea of being so utterly, moronically useless, so much so that you are condemned by God. Remember what David said over in Psalm 14? Has said what? The fool has said in his heart, there's no God. These people would have understood that. The word fool, well, the Hebrew equivalent for fool was used in the Old Testament a lot. They understood when Jesus said fool here, it meant something pretty bad. Somebody who was basically a blasphemer, somebody who had rejected God, somebody who was going to hell. So essentially, Jesus says, when you start having such contempt and anger and hatred for somebody that you could say something like that or even think something like that, you basically have judged that person to hell. You've killed them spiritually in your mind, and you have no business doing that. We'll find out later. You're in danger of hellfire when you start judging other people to hell. When you start saying that somebody's so worthless even God wouldn't want them. Be careful what you say. Be careful what you think. Sometimes we kid ourselves into thinking that we're keeping God's rules, but we overlook his intentions. That's what the Pharisees did. They'd never commit murder. Wouldn't kill somebody. But you know what? They were angry enough at Jesus that they'd have him killed, wouldn't they? So if somebody at work has a deadline, somebody at work doesn't make the same valuation on something that you think they ought to make, somebody doesn't have the same business sense that you think they ought to have at work, or an employee doesn't do what you expect them to do, or your boss starts behaving in ways that make you angry, or whatever your situation is, your wife, your husband, your children, your parents, and you think to yourself, you know what, you're just about as useless. Well, I won't finish that one. That's old country saying. Probably wouldn't fit well in church. But you're worthless. You're useless. God has no purpose for you. I wish you'd just curl up and die. And don't sit there and act like you've never done it before. Because I know if I've done it, some of you, because I'm better than some of you. When we get there, we've gone too far, Jesus says. We've gone beyond the intention of the commandment not to murder. We've gone a long way down the road of hatred and anger and murder in our minds. And so to brand somebody like that as a violation of the soul, so devastating, it justifies a person who said it being severely punished, Jesus says. Reminds me, there was a song by Creed several years ago. I don't even know if people listen to Creed anymore. I used to. And the name of the song was What If? And in the song, they said, I know I can't hold the hate inside my mind, because what consumes your thoughts controls your life. So I'll ask just one question. What if? What if your words could be judged like a crime? What if we put the word thoughts in there? What if your thoughts could be judged like a crime? That's what Jesus is talking about here. Hateful words spoken in anger, treated like a crime. So Jesus reminds us it's not possible for people with attitudes like that to be thought of as truly good and righteous. Those are not kingdom attitudes. People who think that way are out of harmony with the kingdom. Now I know somebody's thinking, so you're saying I'm going to hell for calling somebody a fool? Calling somebody a moron? No, I don't think that's what he's saying. He's saying if you've got an attitude like the one just described, you don't have a kingdom heart, and you're not living according to the principles of the kingdom. And so Jesus says this is serious. When you cut people down with your words, Jesus says, I came to give my life for people who cut me down with their words. Don't you have the same attitude? I'll still die for them. I love them. Don't you have their attitude? And so Jesus is operating at a heart level. He's saying, don't embrace anger. It's a bad attitude. It'll take you down a bad road. It'll crush you. So Jesus has shown us this attitude. Now let's look finally at the antidote that fixes these broken relationships. When your attitude breaks your relationship, and that's another thing. You know, we think so often in terms of what it's going to cost me if I do wrong. Well, what if I have a bad attitude towards somebody? What if I say somebody's a moron? What if I have an evil spirit and a heart of malice towards somebody? You know, we're so concerned about whether or not that's going to cost us heaven or hell. How about, those are big stakes, but how about what it's going to cost between me and you? You know, those people that were yelling and screaming at each other yesterday, treating each other like just dirt over a silly baseball game. Do you think that after that game was over that, and I'm going to just go ahead and say right now, I know that some of them in those stands and some of them out on that field were Christians. We're believers in Jesus that are sitting in church this morning. Do you think those people would be able to get along with it? In fact, let's just think a little bit about those folks. Some of you may be there. Some of you yesterday may have sat at a ballpark and acted a fool. I've done it before. Maybe you acted a fool in your home, in your kitchen. Notice what Jesus says. Verse 23 23. Therefore, Jesus says, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. You know, I've preached this sermon before. And I remember the last time I preached this sermon, several years ago, we actually changed the order of worship. And we had communion and collection at the end. And we had some people that got up and left and didn't partake of communion after the sermon. So I did that on purpose. Maybe we should have done that today. Jesus says, if you've got a problem with it, don't worship me. Don't sing praises to me, Jesus says. Don't offer your gift before, if you've got a problem with a brother's got a problem with you, and y'all's relationship is not healed, you fix that before you start coming to me, because you can't really worship me in spirit and truth when you've got anger and hate in your heart for somebody that I love. Jesus says, go and settle it. Settle it quickly. He says it's more important to be reconciled to somebody than it is to be engaged in religious activity. Worship, listen, church, worship becomes a sham. It becomes a joke. And I'll tell you, there have been many a time I've sat on that pew and I'm sitting there thinking about the words I'm saying. I guess that's part of the, when you preach for 15 years, 16 or 17, whatever it's been now, and you're kind of forced to deal with some of this stuff, maybe a little bit more than if you're not constantly having to prepare and study lessons and that kind of thing. And you think about the words that you're singing, and you think about what you're doing, and you realize that everything you've done up to this point in the week makes what you're doing right now on Sunday morning out to be kind of a joke. All to Jesus I surrender, and I ain't surrendered nothing up to him until I came to church this morning, and that's not even a surrender, because I was planning on coming anyway, because that's what I do. It becomes a sham if we behaved so poorly prior to coming to worship that we've knowingly hurt somebody. 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 and 21. If anybody says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. Anybody that doesn't love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And he has given us this command, whoever loves God must also love his brother. So settle things before attempting to worship. Now I know, and I have heard this, and I'm just going to say this. This is not bragging. There are a lot of faults that I have in my life, and if I enumerated them for you, some of you'd probably be shocked. But one fault that I have not, thank God, I've not had to deal with in my life is, for some reason, I can't hate anybody. I can get mad, but I can't stay mad for too long. I can't hate you. I've had people say before, so who would you consider your enemies? I'm like, nobody. I can't think of anybody that I think of as my enemy. They may see me. They may feel like they are my enemy. I don't see them as my enemy. I can't hate anybody. I have a hard time holding a grudge. I have to try. I just have a hard time doing it. But I've heard some folks talking about, well, I just can't, I just can't forgive. I just can't forgive that. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm angry about that, and I have every right to be angry about that, and I'm going to stay angry about that to the day I die. They did me so wrong. You just don't know how wrong they did me. I have a right to be angry. Yeah, Jesus did too. Jesus didn't have to go on that cross. Well, I'm not Jesus, yes, but you're called to be like him. 1 John chapter 2 says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. What Jesus did, he forgave. Some of you, I know, in a crowd this large, some of you are grudges in your heart right now. Some of you got some anger you have not let go of. Some of you are on the verge of doing something you shouldn't do with that anger. I want to encourage you this morning. Don't leave until you've let that go. Until you've asked somebody to pray with you. Just let it go. You know, I used to do this little illustration. I'm not even going to, I guess, finish my sermon. I just want to say this a little quick. We used to do this illustration where we would go to other churches, youth events, and I'd take my youth group, and we'd plan this ahead of time. I'd have one of my kids in the middle of my lesson jump up and act like they saw a rat running in the pew. And the kid who did it was pretty convincing. His name was Ross. He's a rodeo clown now, by the way. Very, very convincing actor. And he would jump up and say, see that rat? And I mean, scared some girls in church to death. And he said, yeah, it's a rat ran right under my pew. And so I'd stop my lesson, and I'd walk down, and I'd say, where'd he go? And everybody'd start looking for that rat. We'd just start looking. Everybody's looking under the pews for that rat. And I'd say, well, I just happen to have some rat poison right over here in my bag. And I'd pull out a box of decons. And I'd take a spoon, and I'd dip down in there and dipped out a big spoonful of that decon. And I went over to Ross and I said, here's some. Take a bite of this. And he opened his mouth up and took a big bite of that rat poison and swallowed. It was brown sugar. And they were just looking, the rest of them just looked at me like, are you crazy? It's not how you kill a rat. But you know, when we hold anger in our heart, we're eating that poison ourselves, hoping the other guy will die. And all it's doing is killing us. And there's some of you that are being killed by some anger right now. Jesus says you don't want to go down that road. You need to let it go. Maybe you need to let it go today. There's some elders and some other folks up here. You can come up here, we'll pray, and we'll try to help you let it go this morning. Whatever you need is, we'll encourage you to come now as we stand and sing.
As the